Right. So, hi, Mervin. Thanks very much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
It's great to be in conversation with you again, Steve.
So, obviously, you and I have known each other for some time, and you've been really instrumental in helping me over the years. So, for our viewers, you've helped me to understand my sense of purpose and align with my sense of purpose, and being a real key figure in helping me to create this new business and go on this new journey. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
But I also want to, I think that there's a lot of value that you can bring to the other members of the community, um, specifically around uncovering their sense of purpose and how they go about doing that, but also the value in doing so. I mean, I found that my life has changed exponentially since I've aligned with my sense of purpose, and I've spoken to you about how I kind of feel like I can't really fail now because I'm doing what I felt like I was destined to do. Um, so yeah, I'm quite keen to bring that out into the conversation. As with all of these sessions, I'm no expert interviewer, so we'll make them very conversational, very laid back, and we can make this two-way and just see where the conversation goes. But if I may, could I ask you to briefly introduce yourself, maybe talk a little bit about your background career? I know you had a corporate career, and what you're doing now, just an overview of what your position is now.
Of course, yeah. I suppose if you look at my career, you can almost say that it's linear
Mhm,
in getting me to reach the point which I have. So my background is leadership roles in communications and HR in a number of
mhm.
different sectors. So the energy industry, telecommunications, housing, and steel making.
Steel
And
making,
incidentally,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that was a great experience. And I started as an evening newspaper journalist in the Northeast.
Wow.
So I suppose if you
Yeah.
look at the roles where they've been people facing, you talk about engaging audiences, so with the communication side of things, and then HR engaging the workforce and engaging the executive team in values and behaviors and leadership hallmarks and so on. And I also qualified as a life coach back in 2007 under the government's new occupational standards. Um, so I've been doing that since 2007, but also I am studying to become a qualified psychotherapist. And I'm sure
Fantastic.
you'll agree with me, Steve, that there is kind of like a natural progression there. Or
Yes, yeah, I very much see that. I've been on the journey that Navigate the Curve is built around, and I've struggled with burnout and anxiety, and working in a very high pressured sales environment, and seen that it's almost, to be honest, it's almost universal, I feel,
Mhm.
amongst certainly sales people, certainly tech people, but potentially across the corporate world at the moment with everything that's been going on. Um, so obviously I kind of know what your sense of purpose is because it's,
Mm.
it's loud and clear in all of the interactions that we have. But I thought the
Yeah.
first question, the viewers might be interested in hearing about is, what is your sense of purpose and what kind of gets you out of bed? What makes you excited about life?
In a nutshell, and to use the navigate word,
Hmm.
it's all about helping people to navigate their own ways
Hmm.
through life's challenges and towards life's opportunities. I suppose
Hmm.
that's the neatest way of summarizing it. And I started it, and I pinched the navigate word actually
Hmm.
from
Yeah,
from
it's fine. I
your
won't sue
company
you. It's
title.
okay.
Good on you. But that's the power of that word navigate, doesn't it? Because
Yeah.
you're empowering the individual to make sense of their own world and to come up with the solutions. So my approach, Steve, is very non-directive. I think it's very dangerous if you get into the realms of giving advice. It's about
Hmm.
creating that safe space where the client can work out where they are now,
Hmm.
where they've come from, where they are going to, and what's the strategy they need to put in place to do so. So, in a nutshell,
Fantastic.
yes, I'd say that's what it's about and how it
Okay.
works. It's a very privileged. You'll be more than familiar with this. How you're in a very privileged position
Mm.
of seeing someone being proactive, daring themselves to do something different,
Mm.
picking up the baton and running with it, and the rewards, the prize for taking action can be considerable.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, obviously, I do the mindset coaching piece myself, but seeing people being open and vulnerable to change and seeing how people's lives change when they put themselves out there, it's immensely rewarding. And yeah, obviously, imagine that being the case for yourself. Um, on that note, so you obviously see people going on this journey. Um, the first part of a want to kind of ask two questions around that, but first part of it is what kind of people tend to become your clients? What kind of, not necessarily their personalities or their roles, but where are they in terms of their life when they typically come to you and want to start working with you?
Well, I work in the business to business world, so you have organizations will approach me generally, and they've identified it can be a senior figure
Hmm.
um, or an employee or a manager who they've identified as having potential, but there seems to be some kind of sticking point, or they've hit some kind of plateau. And my role is to help them to release their potential, but first and foremost identify what the blockage is.
Hmm.
Now there are occasions, cards on the table, where sometimes the person who has commissioned me um, might be unaware that there is a working relationship challenge that's bringing new dynamic and is actually at the heart of the issue. So sometimes the type of matters that we'll cover is communication style first and foremost in the workplace, and then we'll move on to the goal setting process and the journey um, for how that individual gets to a better place and starts to make use of their skills, expertise, and knowledge. There are other occasions when an organization will draft me in because they've recognized that they want to support an individual who might actually be in the wrong role. And what you can't do is point that out to the individual through the coaching process. The light bulbs have to go on. And indeed, there's been a few occasions, and you might well come across this with your own clients, where it's very, as an outsider, we can see that here you've got a highly creative person imprisoned by a functional type of role that is very strict on systems, procedures, KPIs, and really they need to liberate themselves to be in another role, or vice versa. Um, so that can be an interesting challenge. So those are the kind of occasions when the coaching is seen as an appropriate intervention.
Oh, brilliant. And the kind of second part of that question is after going on that journey and well seeing your clients go on that journey and you being with them on that, um, once they're back in alignment with their authentic selves and their values and their sense of purpose and kind of going full guns blazing at life, um, what kind of changes do you see in those people? You talk about, sometimes it's creative people trapped in the corporate world, and I guess you're alluding to the fact that they may go on to do something completely different. There may be people who stay in the organization but just go with a renewed sense of purpose and energy. But in terms of their lives, how do typically their lives change after an engagement with yourself and uncovering or realigning with that authentic self?
It's a good question, Steve, and there's a simple answer. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the change is monumental, in fact, transformative, because the idea of purpose and alignment, it's a thread that runs through your entire life. Now, you might be familiar with the Wheel of Life, which it's an excellent diagnostic tool that was developed by Paul J. Mayer. And basically, you divide your life into 8 important segments, which includes family and loved ones, social life, personal growth, health, finances, and so on. And invariably, what you find is that if the purpose is lacking, there will be that tension that starts to impact on not just one but several areas of the life, that those segments. And what comes through is that once the individual recognize what their purpose is and starts to make steps towards achieving that purpose or working with that purpose, the other areas of their lives start to fall into line, removing the tension. Because invariably the person knows, or the client knows, that to fulfill their purpose, it can't be at the expense of the other parts of their life. So suddenly we move from balance, sorry, from purpose to balance as a
Yeah,
means of
yeah,
achieving of
yeah.
achieving that. Because as I'll often point out, you have to start with the measures of success. And anybody who accumulates vast wealth at the expense of those important relationships with loved ones, missing the school pantomime, missing the nativity, etc., that is too high a price to pay. And it doesn't, in my book, look like success. Success is, making sure that all the domains of your life are being addressed.
That makes complete sense. And I also think there's something along the lines of, having that success, inverted commas, in terms of wealth or seniority or position, but in contrast to some values that you may hold dear. So, for example, working for an organization that is clearly destroying the environment, when you hold that value of, being an environmentalist or something similar of that ilk. I work a lot with clients, and I have my own experience of feeling burnt out. And I have a strong belief that obviously some people have external events that they just can't influence, and they have a sequence of external events which have caused them to feel to feel depressed or burnt out. But there are also other people who it's just a realization, quite often subconsciously, that they're out of alignment with who they really are. And I think that was the case for myself. I was in that role in a software organization, and I was lucky enough to be working with great people, and I made a good living, great benefits, got to travel all over the place, but there was just something missing, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. And I think you've kind of nailed it just in your description of that journey that you take clients on there. For me, that realignment with who they are is absolutely key for their mental health, I believe.
And that must have been a challenging period for you, because where you've got that misalignment, you kind of, there's a peeling apart of the individual, or that tension, they're being torn apart.
Mhm.
And you'll have recognized that something will have to give. Um,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's good if you can recognize before that crucial point. If you can take steps to address it, then it's far less painful. I think one interesting view is, well, a couple of interesting views, Steve, is the number of people who will reach middle age and they've worked hard in possibly the private sector. And it's important at this juncture to point out that the private sector can be a force for good. It creates the environment, the framework for prosperity. Um, but there are a lot of people, particularly when they're reaching middle age. I remember reading an article in The Guardian a few years about the increasing number of people who are getting to that stage in life where they're starting to ask questions: what am I about? Why am I here? Isn't there more to life than this? And suddenly deciding on career changes that have led them into probation service, social services, education, and so on. So you might start life not thinking that purpose is all that important, but at some point it's going to tap you on the shoulder and get you to pay attention, that, as your point comes through loud and clear, being in alignment with what we're on this earth to do. Um, it also comes through very strongly in retirement, and sadly, particularly with males, where if they've had, if their identity is wrapped up in what they do rather than who they are, then there's a wrong sense of purpose there. And the tension really comes through when they retire and the job has gone, and they've lost their script. They don't know who they are. They've lost their identity. So they will bump into people or be at friends' homes, and they've lost that kind of who am I? Who do I tell these people what I am, what I do? Um, so the idea is to make sure, as Stephen Covey, the business guru said, the
Mhm.
personal development guru said, by all means retire from a job, but never retire from adding value to society. So that sense of purpose does not have to be about, making money, earning in a particular field. It can be adding value to society through voluntary work, some kind of vocational work, adding value to your family, adding value to society, your neighborhoods, starting at a small level. I think it's very important that we understand what purpose actually involves, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I love that concept, Mervin, and also the idea of having your sense of who you are and value tied into one specific role as well. I think that's quite a dangerous thing because I noticed that with myself, um, having, my how I felt about myself directly related to how I was performing in my role. And when you're working in sales, it's an unpredictable environment. There's certain things that you just can't influence, whether a client's going to sign a contract, and it can feel like, the earth is falling beneath your feet, or whatever the phrase is, when things don't happen, just because everything is banked upon that title. And a realization for me now is that I hadn't been building up those other pillars in my life. Obviously, you know me, and you know that I'm now a father,
Yes.
and my life's very different, and there's a confidence that comes from that. So yeah, very, very interesting points there. Um,
And I
okay,
think
is
I
it?
think I was
Sorry.
going to elaborate on that, Steve, if that's all right, about how you can then bring into play the fully functioning person as identified by the eminent psychologist Carl Rogers, who said that there are hallmarks of a fully functioning person. The person who is striving to fulfill their potential. They're striving for self-actualization, but they're also open to new opportunities, and they're in control of their emotions, and they will have a go at something new, something different, really boost the synapses, and they can learn from these new experiences. And I suppose that feeds into the positive psychology movement of the likes of Martin Seligman, who's talking about establishing strong interpersonal relationships and enjoying positive experiences. And yes, he uses the PERMA model, PERMA. So you've got P for positive experiences, and E is about engagement. The times when you're so engaged and immersed in something that you lose track of time. You've got the R, which is the relationships. We are social animals. We rely on strong connectivity. And you've got the M, the meaning. Life has to have meaning. And then the A stands for accomplishment. And you'll know from your clients how what a buzz it can be, how motivational it can be once they start to notch up a series of accomplishments, no matter how big or small. So this all feeds into having a purpose, having impact. And the benefit of having that purpose means that when you reach an important life stage or an important transition, um, it helps you to manage it because you retain the sense of purpose. It doesn't end once you give up work or leave the workplace where you've been used to a different structure, a different way of doing things. And again, that has contributed to your sense of who you are.
That's a really interesting concept, and there's a lot of parallels there with what I do in terms of my mindset
Of
coaching. We talk
course, yes.
about positive activity, exercise, positive interactions, and it's all about community contributing towards something bigger than yourself, and helping people. We talk about, we use the example of our primitive ancestors and how we're tribal creatures. We want to help each other. We want to be part of
Mm.
something bigger, and work together. So yeah, really interesting concepts. Just picking up on something that you said about these kind of life events, and you mentioned before about midlife, things
Mm.
start to think differently. I don't actually know when midlife is supposed to be. I mean, I'm 45 now, so I guess I'm over that stage, but
Don't
I
worry,
don't know
it's
whether I'm
fluid.
I
It's
don't know
very
whether I'm
fluid.
officially middle-aged or not. I guess with all of my grey hairs, I certainly look that way. But that was a time when I started to reflect and think differently. And I know that
Yes.
if I was to go back to my kind of early to mid 20s and maybe have a conversation with myself at that point, I think I'd be thinking very differently. I was motivated about being in a buzzing environment and
Mm.
making some money because I literally had none, and going out and with colleagues and having a few drinks, and that was what excited me at that time. So I'm not sure whether that would have been a good opportunity for me to reflect on my sense of purpose. But I do also at the same time look back and think what a shame it is for some people to go through that first half of their life and maybe not be in
Yes.
alignment. And I was wondering if you is that it's a bit of a difficult question perhaps to answer, but if you have any thoughts around that.
I think the two points there are that it's incredible when you are supporting a person who has no sense of purpose because they're lacking any kind of knowledge of where they can have an impact. But sadly, they're unaware of the huge potential, the skills, the expertise they have to make an impact. They undersell themselves. And I suppose what you've just said there about talking to your younger self then prompts me to ask you, Steve, what would you say to that younger self?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question because I have pondered on that. I would I'd like to think that I would speak to my younger sense self and talk about the importance of sense of purpose and aligning with who I was. But as I kind of alluded to, I'm not sure that would be well heard. And I
Mm,
also think that I'm in a bit of a privileged position at the moment, whereby financially I can afford to take some risks
yes,
and kind of go out there I'm quite, to be honest, I'm quite idealistic. I'm kind of really
yes,
fully in alignment with my sense of purpose at the detriment almost to my business because I'm I'm not kind of I'm not being pragmatic or kind of rounding off any corners. I'm just kind of going for it. Um, but at that stage in my life, I didn't have any money, and going after the money was quite helpful. Um, so I don't know, but one thing that I think I would say to myself is take more risks, play it
absolutely.
less safe, because I
Yes.
I have seen how um, when you do take risks, things kind of jump and the safety net appears. I love that
Yes.
phrase because I've seen that happening with me. So don't play it safe and don't hang around somewhere where you're not in an environment that you're not enjoying. I think when I started off in sales, it's a very different environment to how it is now, and it was very yeah.
Mm,
I don't want to get into too many details, but it was quite a cutthroat environment, quite extreme boiler room, kind of like the film
yes.
Boiler Room. And I think I let myself hang around in places where there were people that were really contrasted the values that I had. And I could have stayed in the same industry, but just moved on. So I think my advice would be to don't hang around somewhere where you don't
Mm.
feel comfortable in, but also be
That's,
prepared to take more risks.
that's good advice. I suppose there's the other argument to say that we had to
Yeah,
embark on that journey as a young person,
yeah.
to take the rough with the smooth, to develop resilience, and to get us to reach the point of realization where we are now, to create that conflict and turmoil for us to wake up and say, like a meerkat standing up and scanning the
Mm,
environment, thinking, hang on, something needs to change here. There are
mm,
all kinds of dangers on the horizon. Let's mitigate those and let's take the path that we're now supposed to take. And I think this scanning the environment is very important, Steve, because it's all very well formulating an idea of where we want to be, what the ideal was, but it's very easy to forget where we are now, who we are, what our purpose is, what our values are that have shaped our behaviors. So you can't really know where you want to be until you have a very clear understanding of where you are now, and indeed where you've come from, what has shaped you.
Mm. Yeah, indeed. I mean, I look back, to be honest, Mervyn, and I look at the key moments that have shaped me as an individual
Mm.
and led me to where I am. And almost universally, those events have been, at the time, negative events. So negative things that have happened to me, which have put me onto a different course. I mean, the whole reason I ended up living in the South and having the career that I had, obviously you know that I'm originally from the Northeast, was down to a relationship I had with a girlfriend who split up with me on the the day that I moved down there.
Wow.
And yeah, I think there's a subconscious um, theme going on for a lot of my sales career to kind of prove myself because of what had happened, and that kind of drove me. So I can't complain, to be honest. That, there was a good outcome from that.
Absolutely.
And I think, these events do shape us. So I think it's difficult to go back and say that I would like to rewrite my history because you never know what comes from it.
And there are words of wisdom there, Stephen, what you're saying, to be able to look back and say, yes, at that point it was uncomfortable, but it was part of the shaping of me and helping me to rethink and go onto a different path. And I think something that I wish that I discovered a lot earlier was the growth mindset idea. So a little bit of background. So Carol Dweck, a psychologist, I think it was she was at Stanford. Her and a team were looking at the hallmarks of a successful person and developed this idea of the fixed mindset, which is where the individual thinks that intelligence, their natural ability, is enough to get them through, as opposed to the growth mindset. And in a growth mindset, a young person or anyone will, when they suffer a setback, will stand back and say, right, what is this telling me? This is an opportunity for growth. This is an opportunity to learn something. And they're the ones who will apply themselves and know that they can get to whatever they want to be, wherever they want to be, by applying themselves and learning from experience. And sometimes you will come across some people who have this, high intellect. They, arguments as to whether they were born with it or developed it, etc. But sometimes when they encounter setbacks, will crumple,
Yeah.
will yield, because they're not used to, they haven't had the resilience building process. So I suppose I would say, show me a person who hasn't made a mistake, and I'll show you somebody who has learned nothing from life.
Yeah.
So certainly tools in terms of helping you to get to your purpose, but to live a fulfilled life. The art of understanding the growth mindset can be hugely influential in that journey. And I don't think I really cottoned onto that until well into my 20s. Yes, it would have made life a lot easier.
I really that really resonates actually. In a lot of the sales organizations that I've worked in, the talk about growth mindset. And I did spend a period of time running the New Hire Academy. It's one of the organizations I worked at. And the organization, they recruited graduates from some of the best universities in the country. And myself and my colleague who worked together running that academy for that period of time, we noticed this trend whereby we had these amazing people, very intellectual, um, and academically they'd be brilliant with all of the kind of academic side of things. But when they got out there into the world and the sales environment, it takes no prisoners. It's a
I
roller
can
coaster
imagine,
ride.
yes.
It's kind of like running your own franchise, but as you mentioned there, getting these inevitable setbacks, some of them they crumbled, whereas some people who, and I classify myself as being one of them, I didn't go to an elite university. Um, they're maybe not so academic, but intelligent at the same time. But they did have that growth mindset. Those are the guys that really accelerate, and you could almost predict it, within a few days of just seeing these people. And I thought it was an interesting observation because obviously those academic types were brilliant in their own way, but
Mm.
maybe their sense of purpose was just a different role. Boy, yeah,
I
yeah.
think you've touched on something interesting there. So, does the role of the setback, is it a bit like, polishing a real rough piece of wood where each setback is an opportunity to polish and smooth and smooth and smooth, and eventually you're getting the message, hey, I was on the wrong path over there. I'm now polishing myself, dusting myself down, and so on. And forgive me for mixing my metaphors and similes, but moving towards the path that actually this is the path that I'm supposed to be on. This is how I can add impact. It would have been nice if I'd spotted that some time ago, but I've learned through the journey. I've learned through getting it wrong.
Yeah, I love that, to be honest, Mervin. I think you and I have spoken about the Stoics. So you know that I'm a big fan of the Stoics, and
Yes.
and I know it's not just them who talk about this concept, but the concept that um, every event that happens to you in life, you shouldn't perceive it as being positive or negative. It's just something that happens. And it's how the one thing that we control is how we think about it. But I love that concept, and I love applying that concept, um, and just looking for the positive, looking for the growth opportunities in whatever happens in life, because when you look for them, it's very true. It's there's positives and negatives in absolutely everything. And I could go off at a massive tangent on my philo. We've already got off now. But yeah, I think this is probably for another day.
I think you're right. I sense that you were then going to move into the area of gratitude, because gratitude is apparently one of the components of resilience.
Mm, yeah,
And the beauty about gratitude is it gets you to appreciate what's going on now and encourages you to live in the present, but also gets you to be grateful for the smallest of sights, events, experiences, and so on. And you start to add those small events and experiences together, and they suddenly become a big deal. And it can change your perspective on life considerably. It's interesting the number of people who developed a gratitude attitude during COVID, during those lockdown periods when we had limited time to experience the great outdoors and nature, and how, whether you're in an urban area or a village location, where just seeing a hedgerow or a hedge with, a butterfly or some kind of, insect life and breathing,
mm,
fresh air,
yeah,
um, was a big deal, and really focused our minds on being grateful for those small periods and small windows of opportunity to go and visit someone, and develop those social connections, or
yeah.
maintain them.
It's
Small
so
things.
powerful, gratitude. I mean, in my practice, I'd use that with clients in every session, and there's a neuroscience behind it. So so we're creating new neural pathways, by doing that, focusing on the positive, but also this reticular activating system, which is kind of like the filter. It filters all of the information from our senses, and we can reset that to focus in on the positive. So the gratitude, I think it's one of those things that is such a powerful thing, and sometimes it's dismissed as being a bit woo-woo by people, which I think is such a great shame because there's real science behind it working. Um, I see that I was talking to a mutual friend yesterday, Rob, about the changes in my life and the contrast to where I am now to where I was a couple of years ago. I had these amazing, in inverted commas, opportunities to experience quite materialistic things, traveling the world with work, staying in really nice hotels and eating, living the London lifestyle. Whereas now I've moved away from London and I'm building a business and I'm, keeping the cost to a bare minimum. But my life is so much richer for it because, if I ever do get to go to a restaurant, it's a big thing. and it's something that I enjoy. Whereas when I was living the London lifestyle, it would be you know, three times a week we'd go there. We'd do it on an ad hoc basis, go for a walk, and end up at some really amazing restaurant. And the food didn't taste as good.
No,
It tastes amazing. In fact, to be honest, there's nothing better than a home cooked meal. I
it's
really appreciate that. So
it's fascinating.
yeah,
You've
yeah,
taken the ordinary and made it extraordinary,
yes. I
and
think
that's really special.
that's what life's all about, is recognizing that sometimes, you know, we have all of the best things already, you know, at our fingertips. We don't need to start chasing you know, these bigger things. But I think we could talk for days on this,
We
Mervin.
could.
I was fascinated talking to you. I'm quite bringing, kind of going back to the sense of purpose piece. So for people who recognize that they may be out of sync with their sense of purpose, and they, you know, they're starting to get that those itchy feet, are there any kind of tips that you might give to for someone who wants to start exploring themselves and getting to their sense of purpose, other than obviously working with yourself is
You're
the
too
best
kind.
tip?
Thank you.
But before they were to do that, or if they wanted to take their own route, are there any kind of snippets of wisdom that you might give them?
The two, I'll start with one that I did on myself before I discovered the joys of ikigai. I'll come on to that in a moment, but we talked about a few moments ago, Steve, about sense of identity and the risk of, you know, not being in step with what your true identity is. And I made the decision where I I'd worked at a place that was initially going to be 6 months and it turned into 6 years. And I had a great time there, made an impact, benefited from, you know, the wisdom of others, but then made a decision that I really need to leave. And I was thinking in the back of my mind, will I go back to life coaching or do something else? But I made a decision to be very clear that I didn't wrap my identity up in what I did and the, you know, the senior role that I held. So I got down with a pen and a sheet of A3 paper, and I did some stakeholder mapping. Now, I'm sure your listeners and followers will know that a stakeholder basically is somebody who you have an influence on, or they have an influence on you. They have a best. You both have a vested interest in the relationship. And I started to map who I was in terms of stakeholder roles. So I started with husband, father, son, uncle, brother, and it got as far as, even, you know, who I am as a customer. I have the opportunity to make ethical consumer decisions, investment decisions, and so on. I'm a neighbor, a citizen. And suddenly you recognize that you are at the center of this amazing web, and that if you were to take yourself out of that, wow, what would happen to everybody else who've been, you know, benefited from your interactions and being there. And secondly, it gets you to appreciate the enormous influence you can have. So when you've done that mapping, you start to think, well, have I had a positive influence on these people, or a negative one, or a neutral? Where there are positive ones, what are the characteristics that I've demonstrated? And is it about my communication? Is it about support? And slowly you start to build up a picture of who you are and the positive impact you can have, which then turns into who you can become, or where you can devote your time and effort. And I found that very powerful and liberating. And I started to build up a picture of how I engage people. I create a safe space in which they can talk to me and tell their stories and so on. And I suppose a facilitating type of role. So that's one piece of work that you can do with a pen and a piece of paper. Another one is to follow the principles of ikigai. And in a nutshell, ikigai is about your reason for being, your reason for getting out of bed. Now, ikigai talks about these overlapping four spheres where you identify What am I good at? What can I do? How can I earn a living? What do I enjoy? And also, what does society need? And where they all overlap, that is your purpose. So I would advise or encourage rather followers and listeners to do some research into ikigai and those simple principles and see if they can find out what their purpose is there. So a little bit of a roundabout way, but there are tools and techniques you can use to establish your purpose. Think of your purpose like a coat hanger, and the garments hang
Hmm.
from that. Everything makes sense once you have
I love that metaphor,
that
Mervin. Yeah,
purpose.
there's
Yeah.
some fantastic tips there.
Thank you.
Mervin, I feel like we could talk for hours. I
And we
think we need to
could.
do another session after this, to be honest.
Yes.
But in the interest of time, I'm going to have to call it a day on this one. But the conversation has been fascinating and really valuable. I think the viewers are going to get great value out of that, especially those last tips at the end. Um, so thank you, Mervin. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think there's another session on the horizon that we need to we need to do together.
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Well, thanks again, Mervin. And yes, appreciate all of your comments and your wisdom today.
Absolute pleasure. Have a good day,
Thank you.
Steve.